I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, Congress takes up the question of vaccinating for the measles and passes a bill to try to prevent suicide among veterans. We'll also have the state's latest water use report card.
Plus, a 401k retirement plan and new health insurance options for military members and their families. They're just a few of the major changes recommended by a commission to modernize military benefits. I'm Peggy Pico. How the plan could save the government $20 billion. Just ahead.
And we continue our year-long salute at Balboa Park, the heart of San Diego, with an up-close look at a park treasure and one family's very personal connection to it. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Worries about measles made it to Capitol Hill today. The Centers for Disease Control says there have been 102 cases reported this year in 14 states. Many of them are linked to an outbreak at the Disney theme parks in Anaheim. Today, doctors told a congressional hearing many of the patients were not vaccinated against measles. Most of the confirmed measles cases are in California. It is the biggest outbreak here in 15 years. Also in Washington today, unanimous approval in the Senate for a bill to fight suicides among military veterans. The Clay Hunt Act is named for a veteran who committed suicide in 2011. It requires independent reviews of suicide prevention programs at the Pentagon and the VA. It also offers financial incentives for mental health professionals who agree to work for the VA, and it would help military personnel transition from active duty. President Obama has already said he will sign the bill. An independent panel recommends big changes to military retirement benefits. Peggy Pico explains how the plan could impact San Diego families if approved.
More than 100,000 active duty military members live in San Diego County, making it the largest concentration of service members in the country. Last week, the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission unveiled a plan that would shift the military's current pension system to 401k retirement plans and eventually eliminate the health insurance program TRICARE. But it would not increase military salaries. Here with further details is Tony Teravainen, President and CEO of the nonprofit group Support the Enlisted Project, or STEP. And Tony, I understand 150,000 service members provided input to the commission for this report. What are some of the major takeaways?
Well, the major takeaways was the commission really looked at how to modernize today's pay and benefit system for today's service members. So some of the things they had to do, they looked at some items to trim some costs, some ways to shift the retirement program, some ways to shift the medical benefits, and then also some non-compensation type benefits. What really look at the military family as a whole and try to take that into account and how can they provide some benefits that aren't working now or efficiencies that way.
Well, let's walk through this step by step.
Sure.
Let's start with the retirement benefits to enlisted military members. What are some of the changes there?
It looks to be, I mean, it's a 230-page report, so there's lots of details and stuff in there, but it looks like shifting from a 20-year program. Currently, if you stay 20 years, you'll go to a pension system that's approximately 50% of your pay. About 20% of the service members make it that far, but that pay starts at that 20-year point.
Sure, and these changes then would be kind of offering sort of a 401k more like other companies, correct?
Right, the pension would still be there. It looks like they're going to move that to a retirement age and lessen that, and then, so that's kind of the takeaway. Then the give back is the 401k piece, where service members will pay into a more traditional 401k with matching investing.
So if you left early, you'd get at least some retirement
Correct.
back, correct? There's also a grandfather clause, too, so it wouldn't apply to people who have already retired and things like that.
Current retirees and current service members, right.
Okay. The report also recommends TRICARE health insurance, the military health insurance, be phased out, and in its place that service members and their families would get the option of health care insurance policies similar to to what other federal employees get. What is health care access like for military families here in San Diego, and would this change help?
The change, reading through the report, they cite a lot of issues, and it's a lot of the same type of healthcare issues that you normally see. It looks like this is one of the cost-saving pieces where they're going to be able to save some money here with this, putting people onto commercial accounts and go to more of a traditional. They'll receive some allowance to pay for their healthcare allowance, like you would in a major corporation.
And you'd buy your own, so $300 allowance a month. Right. You buy your own. Now, the plan, as you mentioned, is projected to save the government $20 billion in the first 4 years. Where would that savings come from?
Well, since it's not grandfathered, or everybody's grandfathered current, so that would just be new people that came into the service through most of the changes. But it looks like there's 3 areas. The retirement program is a savings area. The healthcare area looks to be a savings area, and then some changes with the GI Bill, how you can have other people use it. It looks like there's some changes in that area as well, and those are the major areas where they're going to save the money.
Retirement, health, and then the GI Bill. The proposal does not actually include changes to military pay structures, even though the Commission notes that some military families get so little money that they actually are eligible for food stamps. What's your take on that?
Well, 30% of the military members here in San Diego rely on food assistance regularly to feed their families. 60% of the junior enlisted are actually low income by HUD standards. So there's a lot of low pay issues. They don't address it. It's a hot button issue. It looks like they tried to make an overall recommendation that could go as a package that kind of hit the middle of the road. No hot button issues. Pay is always a tough topic. So coming up with some of the secondary benefits to help entice people to join and then stay in the military.
Another big issue here in San Diego is affordable child care and access to affordable child care for military families. Did the Commission address that problem?
They did. That was one of their recommendations, was to increase child care. The military offers child care on some of their bases, and it is at a reduced cost. So this is one of the secondary benefits. The waiting lists, though, are very long, and there's
so it's going to take some time for that one, but at least they addressed it.
Addressed it, right.
What are the next steps for this? Where does it go from here? I know the President needs to look at it. What happens next?
Right, so the Commission made the recommendations, and then these recommendations went to the President. They went to Congress. Also, Secretary Hagel, Defense Secretary, is looking at them, and they will all look at them. And then I think really the next major step will be congressional action. They'll have to start to try to take some of these and push them through the code changes.
So we'll be following up on that. Tony Teravagnan, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
There's another arrest tonight in a multi-million-dollar bribery case involving Navy personnel and a defense contracting firm. Federal prosecutors say the newest suspect was a high-level civilian working as a contracting officer for the Navy. 60-year-old Paul Simpkins is accused of taking bribes to steer business to a contractor based in Singapore. The contractor and several Navy officers have already pleaded guilty. The case may have cost taxpayers $20 million. Prosecutors say the investigation is far from over. There are some new developments tonight in a corruption scandal involving Calexico's police union and top city officials. Last month we told you about an FBI investigation, and the police chief's claim union leaders were, in his words, quote, acting like the mob, end quote, with threats and intimidation. The union filed a defamation claim against the city and the chief, and tonight Calexico's finance director is being added to the claim. It's because of a memo John Quinn sent to city council asking for a raise. In it, he mentions corruption and says council was subservient to the police union. The investigation is still pending, and you can find our coverage of the case at kpbs.org. California will get a slice of a huge settlement with Standard & Poor's. The credit rating agency is paying more than $1 billion to settle claims. It knowingly inflated the ratings of risky mortgage investments that helped trigger the financial crisis in 2008. California's share of the settlement is $210 million. California finally hit Governor Jerry Brown's water conservation goal. The state reduced the amount of water it uses by 22% in December. Joining us to talk about the accomplishment, KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. Eric, California finally hit the conservation goal. What happened?
Well, Dwayne, it's almost like the answer sort of fell out of the sky. In fact, it did fall out of the sky. California had a pretty soggy December, and residents responded by turning off irrigation systems for much of the month. Now, that pushed down statewide water usage by 22%. The goal was 20%, and here in San Diego, the decline was 29%.
So conservation is on track. What are water officials saying?
Well, they're saying that they're pretty pleased. They're happy that statewide residents appear to be hearing the drumbeat call for conservation. In fact, state officials say per capita water use has been nearly cut in half just over the past 6 months.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Does that mean the drought is no longer a concern?
Actually, the drought remains very much with us. January, a very dry month in the state of California. San Francisco had its first January on record without any measurable rainfall. The state's largest supply of fresh water, the Sierra Nevada snowpack, is 88% below normal for this time of year, and reservoirs around the state remain less than full. Now, I spoke with an official at the San Diego County Water Authority today, and Ken Weinberg told me the state is behind the curve when it comes to yearly rainfall totals, and he's not sure if that deficit is going to be made up. He says it's possible there will be tighter water restrictions in the works. State officials are considering stricter rules that do more to limit water use, and the state's largest water wholesaler in Los Angeles is also looking at tightening the spigot. Ken Weinberg thinks there could be some limitations on water use coming from them as well.
KPBS reporter Eric Anderson. From water to the cost at the pump, gas prices are going up again. They've gone up about 2 cents over the past 5 days and are expected to keep rising for 2 reasons. First, the annual switch from winter to summer blend gasoline, and because of a petroleum workers' strike, it's closed down a refinery up in Northern California. The county grand jury wants to change the way salaries for the city's elected officials are set. The panel says the current system creates a conflict of interest since council members and the mayor vote for their wages. The report recommends finding alternatives and putting those before voters. There are new limits on how much money political parties can give to candidates running for county offices. Supervisors set the limits at $25,000 for district elections and $50,000 for countywide offices. Back in 2013, the city of San Diego approved similar caps. The county's new rules will be reviewed every 2 years and adjusted if needed. Last week, the city of San Diego granted its first land use permit for a medical marijuana cooperative. And this week, it gave final approval to some new regulations for co-ops. KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Minto joins us from the News Center with details. Taryn, can you explain the difference between what happened last week and today?
Well, to put it simply, cooperatives have to adhere to at least 2 sets of rules. First, zoning rules. The city last week upheld San Diego's first land use permit for a cooperative, which means it met the zoning rules. The other set of rules is about health and sanitation. That's what the city council updated today.
And what kind of changes did they make?
The amendments allow the city to test marijuana items for byproducts such as pesticides and bacteria. And it gives the city the right to revoke the cooperative's public safety permit. That's the second permit a cooperative needs after a land use permit. The changes also set a fee for the public safety permit at nearly $1,100.
But some folks at the meeting raised concerns about issues the amendments didn't cover. What were those?
Right. Opponents were concerned about potency labeling for edible pot products and dispensary delivery services. The amendments only suggest cooperatives label for potency. They don't require it. And they don't include regulations about deliveries. That's up to state law. But Councilwoman Lori Zapf did say she wanted to discuss the issue at a future committee meeting. And we've got a lot more about the rules for cooperatives, including an explainer video at kpbs.org.
KPBS reporter Taryn Minto. As Balboa Park celebrates its centennial this year, much attention is drawn to the Spanish architecture, museums, and gardens. But KPBS radio anchor Sally Hickson tells us there's another gem in the park with a story of its own.
From a distance, the Balboa Park carousel draws in people of all ages, and most of us who grew up in San Diego took a spin at one time or another. but it also has a history that actually predates the 1915 exposition.
The carousel is a 1910 Herschel Spillman menagerie carousel, and it was made in North Tonawanda, New York, and shipped to California.
Bill Steen is the owner of the carousel and said it was initially sent to Los Angeles and then to Tent City in Coronado in 1915. At the same time, Balboa Park was growing into a popular spot, so the original owner decided to place it by the fountain on the eastern edge of the park.
They finally settled down in the park in about 1922, and it was in that location by the fountain. And it remained there until 1968, when it was moved up to this location in the park.
There's another reason why this Balboa Park carousel is so important, at least to me. I grew up here at the carousel because my grandfather got involved with it in the 20s. My parents had it in the 50s. I grew up here, and you're looking at the ticket box where I sat for many hours selling tickets to put me through college. So that move from the fountain in 1968 stands out in my mind as the city asked my mom to move her carousel to make way for the Reuben H. Fleet Science Center. Now 92, my mom, Virginia Long, owned it for nearly 30 years and was proud of its unique features, especially the fine craftsmanship on each animal.
They're hand-carved, and I know the kind of wood, linden wood, from the linden trees in London, in England.
Many of the horses have real horse tails, which raises an interesting story for both my mom and me.
The zoo is very kind, and they kill horses when they're old and feed them meat to the tigers and lions, and they would cut off the pretty tails.
What she didn't tell you is that she hated to see those bloody tails that had just been removed from the horses, so I went with her and took the tails to the tanner, where I watched them clean them for the carousel. I was a kid, and I didn't care. And for kids on the ride itself, an added feature is the ring toss, with a surprise for a lucky rider or two.
If you catch the ring, the brass ring, you get a free ride. And I believe we are the only active ring toss game west of the Mississippi.
There is a standard rule, though, that only the employees can move about during the ride. Once, I remember hearing how Robert Preston, who played Professor Harold Hill in the movie The Music Man, rode the carousel and wouldn't stay still.
If I stumbled and I busted my whatchamacallit.
My father gave him several warnings and finally stopped the carousel and kicked Preston off. As a kid, I couldn't believe my father kicked an actor off our merry-go-round. Dad later told me Preston had too much to drink. My father was running the carousel that day from its center, where you'll find all of the equipment that makes it whirl. Bill Brown is the carousel operator now and has been doing so for over 42 years.
This is all original. This is all over 100 years old. This is the brake, which we put on and we're stopping, and this is the clutch we pull on to start the carousel. But we do it exactly the same way that they did over 100 years ago. We have the same timer here. It's a 3-minute timer. It's what they used back then.
Almost everything on the carousel is original, including the band organ and the hand-painted murals above the animals. And as you can well imagine, the maintenance is extensive and is a year-round labor of love.
It's a well-loved merry-go-round. And I'm so glad there's a variety of animals. Tigers and lions and pigs and cats, because I painted the animals. And if they were all horses, I would have been very bored.
It's been 35 years of loving care and carrying on the fine traditions that Virginia and Clarence Wilkin, her dad, set up for the merry-go-round. So little has changed over these, 90 years that the two families have owned or operated the merry-go-round.
So as you head to Balboa Park to celebrate its history, take a spin on the carousel, which truly can take you back in time. Sally Hickson, KPBS News.
We've got photos of the carousel at kpbs.org. It's part of our year-long celebration, Balboa Park, heart of San Diego.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next News Hour, breaking the cycle of poverty in Appalachia by improving education in West Virginia. That's Tuesday on the PBS News Hour.
We've apparently got a lot more in common with fish than you might realize, and our wetlands are vital to the population growth of many species of birds, as we find out in tonight's edition of our Wild San Diego.
Well, I have a lot of kids ask me, or rather I like to ask them, do fish have tongues? And the first answer I get is like, nah. And I'm like, really? Bleh. They do. We have a lot more in common with them.
That is a tongue.
It is a tongue. We have a lot more in common with fish than a lot of people might think.
And that brings us to our subject matter today.
Yep.
Fins?
Fins. So we're going to do feathers and fins. So fins will be a dissection with Feaster Elementary's 5th graders, and they'll get to learn a lot about fish anatomy, which in turn, which in turn tells them a lot about our anatomy. We're also going to go talk about feathers and what we've got on the marsh here.
With the Fish and Wildlife.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to join us.
Excellent.
Just watch it pop back up out of the water. They're diving birds. See them?
If you all grab your binoculars, we're going to look at some of the birds and what different activities they're doing. You can see the ones out here are walking around. They're looking for food.
So when we think about counting birds, have we seen over time, say just over the last few years, a change in the numbers?
It's cyclical a lot of the time, cyclical with the environment based on, in some cases, the amount of rainfall. We're in drought, so you start seeing a lot less food production in some of the farm fields that let some of these birds make use of getting their food, getting their forage base. And in times of drought, there's less food. During times of, of heavy rain and good rainfall, there's a lot more food. So those numbers are going to fall and rise based on their food source. Those are the environmental cues that these birds will use for even reproductive purposes. Some birds will have 2 clutches. They'll double clutch, kind of like a Michael Jordan, from the free throw line, where they'll raise 2 different groups of young. They'll raise a clutch of young, say 5 young in the early portions of the season. And then if the environment is still really good, they'll actually have another family. Wow. So they call it double clutching. And that's when you really have a good amount of food and the habitat is just right. Everything's working out, they'll double clutch.
Double clutch. And how long does it take birds to do 1 clutch versus 2 clutches?
Well, everyone's a little bit different. Some will incubate longer than others, but usually incubation you're looking at 2 to 3 weeks to sit on eggs, and then you're looking at sometimes a month to 2 to even 3 months before the young fledge, before they leave mom and dad. They become teenagers and they get restless and they take off. So it's called they're fledglings, and they're just getting ready to take off and leave mom and enter the real world.
I was wondering where that term fledgling came from. Now you know. We're back at the Living Coast Discovery Center right here in Chula Vista in Mrs. Q's class. Last time we were here, we were talking about snakes. Today, it's all about
fish.
Fish. And what are you going to do with the fish?
We are going to dissect a fish. We're going to compare the anatomy of a fish to our anatomy because, believe it or not, they're very similar.
Let's check it out.
All right, so you ready to remove the gills? You're going to roll him onto his back, and you're going to open up the operculum. And inside the operculum, you have the gills. So what you're going to do is you're going to feather it out, and you're going to grab 1 gill, okay? You're going to go down to the top of the mouth. You're going to pull at the top. You're going to follow that arch all the way back to the back. You're going to pull it out, and there's your gill. So you have the rakers, which prevent the food from going into the gills. You have the arch that you grab onto, and the filaments where the oxygen exchange occurs, okay? And then once you have your gill out, you're going to actually place it onto your lab sheet where it says gills. So our objective today is to compare the anatomy of a fish to the human anatomy because we have very similar organs and they work pretty much the same way. So by looking into a fish, they're able to almost look inside themselves and they're able to compare how our circulatory system, how our respiratory system, how our bodies work by looking at a fish anatomy.
And what would you say is the biggest difference between theirs versus ours?
It's a lot smaller. We're about to do the circulatory system, and their heart only has 2 chambers. Our heart has 4 chambers. But also they have something called a swim bladder, which is a really cool organ that we actually copied as scuba divers. They have a bubble inside of them that they can inflate, and that allows them to go up in the water. And then when they want to go down in the water, they deflate it. And we actually wear BCs as scuba divers that we can inflate, go up in the water. So we actually have copied the fish. So we don't have that organ in us, but we're able to actually copy it.
We are looking at warmer weather in the forecast. A mix of sun and clouds along the coast. Temperatures in the low 70s by afternoon. And we've got a mix of sun and clouds as well in the inland valleys. Temperatures there in the upper 70s. Mostly 60s in the mountains with lots of sunshine. 80s in the desert with some high clouds. Let's recap tonight's top stories. Worries about measles made it to Capitol Hill today. The Centers for Disease Control says there have been 102 cases reported this year in 14 states. Now, many of them are linked to an outbreak at the Disney theme parks in Anaheim. Today, doctors told a congressional hearing many of the patients were not vaccinated against measles. Also in Washington today, unanimous approval in the Senate for a bill to fight suicides among military veterans. It would require reviews of existing prevention programs and offer incentives for mental health professionals to work for the VA. President Obama has already said he will sign the bill. And Californians got good marks on their latest water use report card, cutting usage by 22% in December thanks to rainy weather. But January was very dry, and water officials say stricter conservation measures may be in the works. You'll find tonight's stories at kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.